Today is the 4th of October, 2015, and it was a historic day. The 4th of October, 1987, is the day the Soviets launched Sputnik. That's just an interesting holiday in the Soviet Union. That led to the space race.
Right.
Anyway, today, 4th of October, 2015, Part 1 will be the aftermath of the first Hillary-Trump debate, presidential debate, and then Part 2 will be a preview on the vice presidential debate between Pence of Indiana and Tim Kaine of Virginia. So this is called Athens Speakout, number 383. And we have this format, which Steve Antle will keep us on time. Okay. So I want to come back as an introduction to a point we made last week, which you made about in our discussion about Lester Holt's expose of Trump, which we both agreed with, but you made a kind of a point at the end that left me a little bit curious. You said that you believe in the importance of change, and you can't understand why the voters are confused about the nature of change. Well, I would like to revisit that question and say that in the democratic system, as it developed in the United States in 1789, in France, at the same time, the foundation of democracy was based on, in the French parlance, liberty, equality, and fraternity. And nobody was talking about change. That's a 20th century cliche, which I don't know what it means. But anyway, the French were inspired by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and secondly, John Locke, an Englishman, and thirdly by Viscount of Montesquieu, also a Frenchman. And they all outlined a philosophy of democracy. And the U.S. Constitution also borrowed from Locke as number one and Montesquieu number two, but there were very few Americans who were inspired by Jean-Jacques Rousseau's famous essay, The Theory of the General Will. And the general will has been somewhat suspect in both Britain and the United States to this day. So they will come with differences. But one more, fourth philosophy we want to mention, and this gets into this problem of change. There was another French philosophe, they call them philosophes, by the name of Marquis Condorcet. And he believed in the inevitability of progress. And it was quite clear that science had made progress. Sir Isaac Newton discovered physics, and then we had Charles' law and Boyle's law in chemistry, and biology and geology were developing as natural scientists. Well, Condorcet said, well, since we've made such fast progress in natural science, it's only a matter of short time before we have moral progress. Now, that's where the controversy begins. Moral progress exists, but it's very, very slow. Scientific progress is very rapid. So that René Descartes was one of the major philosophers who developed the scientific method and made the distinction between subjective thinking and objective thinking, logic. Well, in 1687, Isaac Newton came up with the law of gravity, and Condorcet said, that's the beginning of moral progress. Well, it's like looking at the Indianapolis Raceway, where the scientists are going 350 miles an hour, and moral progress creeps at about 3 miles an hour. course, we did make some moral progress in 1789. One of them was to give the women the right to vote. A second one was freeing the slaves, and eventually the slaves got the right to vote, and we now have, at least in theory, black and white equality before the law, before the law. Now, that's the key trick. We all know that blacks and whites are not equally in social, educational attainment. And that's where you get into the subjective debate, and are we making moral progress? Yes, I think we are, but it's very slow. And in these presidential elections, we have to reinvent the wheel every time. The assumption of the pundits is that every voter is only 18 years old, and he's never heard of Jefferson or Lincoln or Locke or Teddy Roosevelt or Franklin Roosevelt. And the only president that's now being referred to in history is Ronald Reagan. And I think they're mostly misquoting Ronald Reagan. Well, anyway, do you have any more comments about progress and change and the difference between progress and change? I can change my suit of clothes, but that's not a significant change.
Well, I was about to ask you what you meant by moral progress, and then you kind of elaborated by talking about, women's suffrage and, the abolishment of slavery and stuff. It put me in mind of a quote by Molly Ivins, the great journalist from Texas, the great columnist, where she said that it's possible to read the history of this country as one long struggle to extend the liberties in our Constitution to everyone in America.
Well, I agree with that.
And I think
I think that racism is the biggest problem in the United States. Black, white.
Well, yeah, I think it always has been. And I think that a big contributing factor to how it persists in that way today is white America's inability to recognize or own up to the actual history of race in America and what's happened and how the consequences reverberate through our society today, affecting everything from housing to education to employment.
Right. And the Texas textbook committee has a different textbook in Texas than they do in Massachusetts.
Well, yeah, Texas famously rewrote their textbooks in a very conservative fashion.
Don't you think we're in the habit of taking 2 steps forward and then 1 step
That's a
back?
very good point.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. That was a famous quote by Lenin.
Yeah,
Vladimir Lenin, when he started the communist revolution, he changed the Social Democratic Party into the Communist Party.
Yeah.
And he said, we're advancing toward communism. He did that in 1917.
Uh-huh.
Now, in 1921, Lenin became a little more conservative. And he introduced a new party line called the New Economic Policy. He said there's been so much destruction in this civil war that we're going to have to step back, one step back, and let capitalism and let the kulaks recover capitalism before we can make any further progress. So he says, this is one step back in order to make 2 steps forward. And that became the justification of the new economic policy. And that was the party line. And then Trotsky came along and criticized Stalin for not revoking the new economic policy.
Right.
He was continuing capitalism on and on. He said, when are you going to make the step forward again?
And hence the Trotskyist.
Yeah, he wanted to go forward with a new revolution.
Yeah.
And he said, well, Stalin has sold out communism and it's state capitalism under Stalin. And then Stalin couldn't stand that, and he eventually had Trotsky assassinated.
Right.
So that's been the betrayal of the communists, the betrayal of Karl Marx's ideal by, a little bit by Lenin and much more by Stalin.
Right, and,
Yeah.
the Bolsheviks, absolutely. I think, back to your point, though, addressing what you're saying about change. Now, change is a very unclear proposition.
Yeah,
As far as what that means. Change could mean anything. Change could be for the better, it could be for the worse.
That's right, absolutely.
I think or it could be, you know, indifferent to either of those things.
That's right.
Change can happen in any direction.
Yeah.
I think what I was referring to at the end of last episode was more my desire for an outsider.
What do you mean by
an outsider outside of the traditional establishment politics of inside the Beltway, Washington, D.C., where you have the same think tank people and the same...
All right, okay. Well, first of all...
people who have been in D.C.
First of all, we have to
for a long
clarify
time.
Establishment.
Yeah, that's what I'm about to try to do.
All right, go ahead.
The establishment to me represents the elite ruling class interests that attended the same boarding schools, went to the same colleges,
Okay.
were members of the same societies in the elite colleges of the Ivy League.
And that was written in a famous
Go to
essay.
the same dinner parties.
Yeah, that was written by
and act as an echo chamber.
That was written by a famous essayist, a kind of a neo-Marxist by the called The Power Elite.
Yeah.
And that came out in about 1955, 56, The Power Elite. And he said we have three elites. We got the hereditary elite, the Mayflower people, who come here by biology. That's one elite. Then you have the military elite, those who go to West Point and Annapolis. And then you have the corporate elite. Okay, and he tried to lump these all together, okay? And the Congress, he downplayed the Congress. The Congress was being bought out by these hidden elites. Well, there are a lot of conservative historians who denounced C. Wright Mills was his name. C. Wright Mills as a neo-Marxist.
Well, of course they would. The conservatives would denounce him. But it's undeniable. If you look through the history of this country, from the age of the Astors, you know, and the Carnegies,
and James Madison
to
knew
today,
that.
and the Rockefellers. Of course, everyone who is inside the Beltway and in the upper crust of our class system, or at least has to deal with them, knows this. This is all well known throughout the ruling class, at least. And it's not a big conspiracy. It doesn't have to be a big conspiracy where they're meeting in dark chambers like the Bilderberg. This is all out in the open. They attend the same functions. They belong to the same clubs.
It's propaganda.
They all know each other. They were raised with each other. They talk to each other all the time. And they share the same sympathies. They have the same outlooks. And this, to me, creates what people generally refer to as the establishment that gives us our standard neoliberal policy.
I would say it's an oligarchy.
What I would call our gore-soaked American empire.
I would call it certainly an elite, certainly an oligarchy, and maybe a plutocracy.
Yeah, well, with Citizens United, absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't
and
think
I
it
would
be
limit
too
the
far
word
to call
establishment to the British establishment.
Okay.
The British have an established monarchy, and they have an established religion.
Right.
And the monarchy and the religion were tied together from Constantine. The Roman Catholic Church was an established church. And then the established church, the Roman Catholic and the Greek Orthodox, got into a quarrel about who appoints the bishop. And then eventually the Episcopalians branch off, and they were called schismatic from the point of view of the Vatican. But the Protestants, namely Martin Luther and Calvin, were called heretics because they defied the dogma of the Roman Catholic Church as it had evolved by 1517.
Right.
So the United States in its Constitution says Congress cannot establish a religion. And establishment means collecting taxes, and that the citizens have the free exercise of religion. That's where we get freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, the First Amendment. So I'm very cautious about that word establishment. It's being misused.
And that may be true, but I think
from a constitutional point of view,
I think that we know what people mean and are referring to.
That's
when
one
they
interpretation.
Use the term
Well, you
establishment.
can,
I think popular usage, we generally know what people are referring to. And I would prefer not to use the word establishment either. I would prefer to use the term ruling class.
The ruling class is fine.
That's what it is to me. It's
that's
the
what
ruling
Marx
class
calls
of this
the ruling
country.
Class.
And what I desire when I talk about change is an outsider. Someone from outside the ruling class, someone who
who is this,
will challenge.
Who is this God figure?
Well, I don't have one.
Nobody does.
I don't have one right now.
All right,
I don't. I wish that I did, and that's kind of what I was bemoaning at the end of last episode. Is that I don't have this agent of change, this outsider to the ruling class that will shake up these principles.
Under the American Constitution,
even though that's
we
what
have
I
three
desire.
branches of government. Congress makes the laws, the President enforces the laws, and the Supreme Court interprets the laws. And then we have a division between the federal government in these three branches and the 13 states, and they expanded to 50 states. And there are some people saying, well, Puerto Rico should be made a state, Washington, D.C. should be made a state, and that's still debatable whether they should be a state or a commonwealth or a separate nation. The Philippine Islands were a territory, and the United States and the Filipinos agreed to let them get out of the United States for the mutual benefit of both the Filipinos and the United States. They're going to have, by the way, they're going to have the last joint exercises between the American government and the Philippine army.
Yeah,
they will do that this last time.
The president of the Philippines right now is a
corrupt.
real piece of work. He's promised extraordinary violations of human rights and due process, and basically tracking down, hunting, and killing anybody he accuses.
And we had a guy by the name of Marcos who was terrible before that.
It's kind of disturbing, actually, and sad to see what the president of
democracy
the Philippines
can decline.
Is doing right now. Oh, absolutely.
It can decay. Yeah. And we had the famous Weimar Republic of Germany that devolved into the Nazi.
Yeah, the Third Reich.
And we had the Italian liberal government.
That devolved into the fascism of Mussolini.
That devolved, and then we had the famous Spanish Republic, established in 1931, short-lived. And Mussolini
and fascism of
Mussolini and Hitler helped Franco to destroy it. Yeah. But then it came back again.
Francisco Franco.
It came back again.
It did. Yeah.
Democracy came back.
Well, often when the strong man falls.
Democracy's in trouble now in Spain. They're in worse shape than the United States.
Yeah.
Is Catalonia going to secede?
So there's an ebb and flow then.
Well, democracy is, government has to be renewed each generation. My job as a historian...
Are you referring to the Jefferson quote?
I believe in Thomas Jefferson. That we have to...
That the tree of liberty must be...
reinforced. Without education, said Jefferson, democracy will not survive very long. And Ben Franklin said the same thing. Gentlemen, you have a republic. If you can keep it.
Yeah.
He gave him a warning.
Well, I always like the Madison quote, too, and it speaks to the importance of an educated population, is that the people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power that knowledge gives.
That's perfect.
And I think that that's so important, and it might explain why the ruling classes, at least in my mind, and I don't mean to get too conspiratorial here,
well, it's not a conspiracy.
Don't seem to really care about the quality of public education in this country, because they certainly don't prioritize it in the budget. And it goes back to the old line, don't tell me what you care about, show me your checkbook and I'll tell you what you care about.
Well,
they don't seem to care about public education, and why not? Because it's not in their interest. They don't want a well-educated populace making good decisions.
They used to be liberal Republicans and conservative Republicans. And Eisenhower was the last liberal Republican. And since Eisenhower's time, the Republicans have either been reactionaries or conservatives. And they are saying low taxes, and Trump is saying no taxes at all, and we can expand debt forever. Well, I'm afraid they're going to have an awakening someday. The dollar is on fiat money, the pound is fiat money, the Chinese is fiat money. Some way of it is gold. Somebody's going to call the debts in. Yeah. And Yellen is kicking the can down the road for 3 months.
Well, that's all they can do.
Yeah.
At this point.
The American economy is in shaky shapes. Shaky. So no one knows the future of capitalism.
That's true. Although this election is kind of funny, though, to me, because I don't think that many of the ruling class elites saw the problems that this lack of quality education in America was causing, and now it's erupted with the popularity of Donald Trump. I mean, he's most popular among uneducated voters.
Okay.
Or undereducated voters.
Well,
but another line that I like to say is that I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I'm a conspiracy analyst.
there have been historically conspiracies. The famous one is Brutus, the Ides of March.
Well, I'm not talking about very specific intrigue. I'm talking about patterns of...
Okay, the United States government has a law defining conspiracy. You have to have an overt act, and you have to have two witnesses. Now, there was a long debate about collective bargaining. And when unions first came along, the Republican elite said, well, unions are illegal because they're using violence to stop free enterprise. It's a conspiracy in restraint of trade. Well, there had to be laws recognizing...
Was that the Milton Fuller Court? That sounds like something they would decree.
We had a problem in recognizing unions. It began with the AFL-CIO. Mm-hmm. Before that, there were the Wobblies. The Wobblies were anarchists. They believed workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chain. So the Marxists and the Wobblies and the anarchists were saying that labor can organize. Well, the Railroad Brotherhood was recognized by the government in order to keep the trains running, and they had their own railroad union. And then the AFL-CIO was recognized by law in 1886 in the United States, and it said that plumbers and carpenters and skilled workers can organize a union in order to pressure wages. Well, then came along the Marxists, and they wanted not a craft union, they wanted an industrial union. And in Roosevelt's time, they formed the CIO, the Congress of Organized, Congress of International Workers, I guess that was it, CIO. The Congress of International Workers. And they said that the entire plant should be organized. Industrial. Yeah, the I stands for industrial. The Congress of Industrial Organization. And they said that when the Ford Motor Company goes out on strike, everybody, whether they are mechanics or plumbers or guards, the whole plant is closed down. Well, that was a much more militant union. So unionism expanded under the United Mine Workers and under the United Automobile Workers from, let's say, 1935 to Truman's election. And Truman tried to keep it alive, but Eisenhower then got the AFL and CIO to merge and form one big union.
Right. And
the plumbers, the conservatives, were on top. And the AFL-CIO has become weakened, and they collaborate with capitalism. And the Teamsters Union were always corrupt. They always did business with the corporations because it was dealt with money. The mafia organized the longshoremen in New York. Now the West Coast were organized by a Marxist from Australia. They had a much more militant union. And he was always under attack by the House Un-American Activities Committee as a subversive. Have you now never been a member of Communist Union? I just his name I forgot his name, but I can look that up on the internet. Who was in charge of the Longshoremen's Union on the West Coast, an Australian, a militant Marxist?
I don't remember.
He was alive during the Roosevelt period.
Okay.
And even during Eisenhower's period. And when I first came to Ohio University in 1964, he was still alive. And they invited him to speak at the Baker Center. And he had one of the most interesting speeches I ever heard. He had a huge audience, and he just sat in the middle of the ballroom, and they held it in Baker Center because Baker Center was owned by a private firm. It was not part of the Ohio State administration. So they had a law that you could not have a communist in any Ohio building financed by the taxpayer. Well, anyway, he sat in the middle of there, and he says, okay, ask me any question you want. So the first question some student asked is the question that the House Un-American Activities and McCarthy Committee kept asking him, are you a member of the Communist Party? And his answer brought the house down. He says, I'm a registered Republican. I'll have to put that on the internet. I can't remember his name, but he was famous.
That's funny. I'm trying to figure it out right now.
Just put,
but I'm not sure.
Pacific Longshoremen's Union. Who was the head of it?
Are you talking about the ILWU, the International Longshoremen Workers Union?
In the West Coast.
Yeah.
Now, the East Coast was different. The East Coast was organized by the Mafia. That's
right.
Marlon Brando in that famous picture.
Harry Bridges?
That's the guy, Bridges.
That's the guy, Harry
Yep.
Bridges.
Famous guy in New Deal terms, Harry Bridges.
Yeah, I'm not. Unfortunately, I'm not too familiar with him. I'm
Well,
more
you can read a
familiar
little.
with Mother Jones and John Lewis and the rest of the, those
John
labor
Lewis
rights.
was a militant union, and
He was the
United Mine Workers,
yeah,
and he
United Mine
withdrew from
Workers,
the
yeah,
AFL-CIO.
UMW. Yeah, right.
He got into a fight with Franklin Roosevelt in 1940. So they said, well, he's collaborating with the communists because Stalin had made a pact with Hitler in 1940.
Right. Yeah.
So people were suspect of John L. Lewis because he said, my mine has come first, and I will collaborate with Mexico on the oil business, and I will strike again. I will not take any non-stock fight if we go into World War II. He would not take that pledge. Well, anyway, so he was kind of persona non grata, but anyway, we should be interrupting. Steve, we should have interrupted. We were going to have 2-minute questions. Whose turn is it now?
Well, we can actually, are we ready for a station break?
Okay.
Anyway, I even got caught up.
Are we in halfway time? What are we on now?
We're approaching halfway.
Okay, let us interrupt that. We've been debating the previous week's debate between the major candidates, Hillary and Trump. And if nobody has a question, I'd like to bring in a comment about that. We're debating this between my colleague, Dave DeWitt, who works for the Athens News, and my name is Robert Whaley, a retired historian from Ohio University. And I just happen to recall the history of Harry Bridges.
Yes. Yes, we covered a lot
and
of
I met
unions.
Harry Bridges in person at Ohio University.
Right here on campus.
And he soon died thereafter.
Yeah, because I just read he died in 1990, it looks
1990.
like.
Well,
Yeah.
he had to retire earlier.
Yeah.
The machines eventually put him out of business. You know, the
Yeah.
Chinese.
Sure.
Yeah,
Well,
machinery.
yeah,
right.
longshoremen in general.
Yeah, right. He had to collaborate with the machine. The machines beat him. Well, anyway,
Like the
I
story
have
of
an
John
interesting
Henry.
headline here to change the subject.
Robert, have you ever been down to Terminal Island there?
No.
Or Long Beach, where they bring...
Well, I actually have been to San Diego. Yeah, I've been to San Diego.
Yeah, but up in the Los Angeles area, the Long Beach and
I've
the
never.
place
No,
called
I haven't been
Terminal
there.
Island, and
No, I've
that
been.
is, really, if you're out there, I don't know if you've been out there or not, David, but
No.
that's something to see. It really is, because all these containers and all these big ships bringing them in from all over the world,
Yeah.
coming in there, and to be the head of longshoremen, that would be quite a thing.
Yeah.
If you could imagine.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
this was called automation. This began with the railroads. When a steam engine went out and they brought in a diesel, they really didn't need a fireman.
Just like I said, John Henry.
Yeah.
Just like the
You
story of
had
John
to
Henry.
you had to have 2 men in the cab. That was called feather bedding.
Yeah.
Well, the longshoremen in the West Coast were feather bedding. Well, they got to have 6 men on this derrick, even though they can only do it with 2. You see, but eventually the machines got robots.
But if you were to drive down there, they've got a lot of cranes and
Yeah.
everything like that. But there's still a lot of work that's that requires
Right.
Men to
Right.
do.
They
There's a
got
lot,
some, but they
because
cut
I
the
doubt that the average citizen realizes just
yeah.
import export business very large.
Well, it'd be interesting
in
to.
the same way on the East Coast,
Yeah,
New Jersey and all that. Has
You should. Well, it'd be interesting to get the membership of the 2 longshoremen's union in both the East and West Coast,
Yeah.
and see how much automation really counts.
right.
Well, anyway, to change the subject, there's an interesting headline in the Athens Messenger on the 27th of September. Clinton, Trump battle fiercely over taxes. True. But then they add 2 more. Clinton, Trump battle fiercely over taxes. And then they throw in race and terror.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a false headline. They did have a fierce battle about taxes, but they didn't really touch race or terror. That was left out.
Yeah, not in any significant way.
Yeah, because I say terror has not been defined by the law. And what's necessary is to have a statute signed by Democrats and Republicans in the Congress, signed by the president, define an act of terror. An act of terror is a murder. We have to have death of people. The use of bombs or bullets that involve the death, and that act of terror has to be defined by jurisdiction. In other words, the British government is responsible for Irish terrorists. The American government, both state and local, are responsible for acts of terrorism that take place on the soil of the 50 states. But to be talking about terrorism in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, no, the United States has no foreign jurisdiction to take care of terrorism against globalism. That's overreach. That's world imperialism.
Well, we are an imperial nation.
That's informally. It has not been recognized.
I think undeniably America is an empire.
Certainly we had Lyndon Johnson as an imperial president, and then he lost and retired, and then we had Richard Nixon.
The American has been the primary, worldwide empire
Nixon,
since.
but he
World
had to
War II.
resign. He had to resign. Okay, so there's been nobody in the United States government to claim that America is an empire. This word empire, imperialism, is still an ideological debate. And Pat Buchanan wrote a very famous book, Are We an Empire or a Republic? That was a good book. I haven't read it.
I agree with both of you, but I think what David said about us being imperialistic is that we simply won't admit it.
Well, yeah, it's like we won't talk about class. We won't talk about the American empire the same way we won't talk about class in America, the same way we won't own up to our racist American history and the consequences of it in today's society.
You're saying...
I think that we'd like to turn on the blinders to these issues.
It all depends who we, okay?
I think American collectively, you can point to the general conversation that happens on the news media waves.
Okay, we have a lot of journalists who made apologies for Nixon, for Ronald Reagan, for George W. Bush. but we also had critics. And the Democratic Party under McGovern and Fulbright denied that the United States is an imperial country and tried to get Nixon impeached and defeated for carrying on an illegal, immoral war in Indochina. They eventually won through Henry Kissinger's secret diplomacy, and Henry Kissinger allowed Nixon to get reelected in '72, but Nixon lost the war under the table because the Watergate came and Nixon had to resign, and Nixon then lost the Indochina War.
Yeah,
that's a fact.
We've had dissenting voices, obviously, but we haven't had anybody in a position of power that hasn't followed the general imperial line.
Well, I think that George W. Bush is the worst president in the United States.
Well, he was one of the most flagrant examples
and he violated,
continuing the American imperial line.
And the weakness of Barack
Obama. He didn't do it clandestinely like Bill Clinton and Barack Obama have. He did it openly, with declaring wars in Iraq and Afghanistan to bring democracy to the Middle East.
He doesn't have the power to declare war. He made war.
Well, yeah.
Congress has the power to declare war.
Yes,
that article has to be defended.
Yeah, well, it was his war, though.
Yes,
and Congress agreed to it. But what I'm saying is that he did this. This was an overt act. This wasn't using drone warfare to bomb poor people across the Middle East in a clandestine way. This wasn't Bill Clinton conducting clandestine warfare in Yugoslavia and other places. These were overt wars that Congress did declare.
No, they had a resolution
of the administration.
There was the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. There was the Iraq resolution. A resolution is not a declaration.
But either way, it doesn't make a difference to me. It's all aspects of imperialism, and it doesn't matter to me whether it's Bill Clinton or Barack Obama doing it clandestinely or George W. Bush marching soldiers on the ground into Baghdad.
When you say
it's all part of American imperialism.
If you say that, you're saying the Constitution means nothing and let's give up.
Well,
let's have a police state.
No,
how are you going to fight the police state?
That's not what I'm saying.
All right, what are you saying?
I'm saying that across administrations,
I agree with that.
American imperialism has continued. Whether it's overtly in the cases of the Iraq and Afghanistan war, or clandestinely in the cases of the drone warfare.
It's illegal.
Absolutely, it's illegal.
Okay. Well, unless law is enforced, the law ceases to be law.
Who shall we rely on to enforce the laws, though?
Well, supposedly, the Congress has an investigation committee to investigate Richard Nixon, and they did. And they forced him to resign.
But that wasn't over his illegal bombings in Cambodia.
Oh, that was certainly part of it.
That was over Watergate.
Well, Watergate was involved. Oh, yes. Daniel Ellsberg. Who was Daniel Ellsberg?
If the Pentagon Papers, I know,
Okay.
The gentleman who leaked the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times and the Washington Post.
Okay, well, there was a Supreme Court case. The Supreme Court defended Ellsberg, and the New York...
When Henry Kissinger's tried for war crimes, I'll admit that we are holding the...
Henry Kissinger is now out of power.
Demagogues responsible for their imperialistic notions across the world.
I'll admit to you that Henry Kissinger was a tricky diplomat who used balance of power techniques.
He was a war criminal who illegally killed millions of people in Cambodia.
He may have been guilty of...
As admirable as his political skill may have been, it doesn't change the fact that he is directly responsible for the killing of millions of people.
He may have been guilty of war crimes. But unless he is arraigned, unless he goes on trial, he's not a war criminal. Now, the Nuremberg trials tried Germans and put them in jail.
He's guilty of war crimes. He's a war criminal. And I don't need a court to tell me that.
Yeah, that's David's assessment. Robert, I have a question for you. Daniel Ellsberg came to Ohio University. Did you get to see
Yeah, I've heard him. Yeah. But I think I heard him at the American Historical Association.
Did you? Okay.
That's where I heard him, but
Yeah.
You say he came to Ohio University? I don't
I believe
remember it.
so, yeah.
Well, I don't remember it.
Of course, John Dean did too. You remember? Did you see
Yeah, he
John
definitely
Dean?
came to it.
Yeah.
And he was one of the
testified.
witnesses against Richard Nixon.
Yeah, he
Right.
testified against Nixon.
The United States, under the American Constitution, is a government of law. And we are still obeying the American Constitution to hold this election. Why don't you just say no more elections? Why
Why would
don't you
I
just
say that?
You say the Constitution means nothing. Don't
No,
enforce
I
it.
did
All
not
you did-
say
you
that.
did not.
I'd never said
Let
that, and I
Clara-
would never,
All right.
absolutely never
All right.
propose that.
Let me give your...
I am a Republican.
Fine.
What I'm saying is that these people who are ruling us mostly don't care about the Constitution.
Right.
They don't have the love that I do for the
Right.
Constitution. I am a Republican in that sense. I absolutely support, I revere the Constitution. I wish that we followed the Constitution. I wish that we followed the Fourth Amendment
Right.
and we didn't illegally collect all of Americans' data without proper warrants and
Okay,
search and
so
seizure.
what was
I
the-
wish that we respected the freedom of the press. I wish that we respected the Eighth Amendment and the
Okay.
Fifth Amendment.
Okay.
And I wish that we had due
right.
process. I'm
Well-
saying they're not following the Constitution. I'm not saying we should not
What-
follow the Constitution. I'm saying they're not.
All right, let's talk about they.
Yes.
I would say a large percentage of the Republican Party do not want to enforce the Constitution.
I agree.
There is less of a percentage in the Democratic Party, but there are some Democrats who want to enforce the Constitution.
I agree with that too.
Good. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. And we do too.
Good.
We would
Okay.
like to see the Constitution enforced.
Okay.
I think we both agree on that.
I'm just saying I wish more people
Yeah, the
Would
Democrats
read-
are less bad than the Republicans on this
I
issue.
wish
for
that
sure.
more people would read McGovern's memoirs.
Oh, McGovern was a real idealist.
Right.
He was an actual admirable
Right.
political leader.
Right.
Of the kind that doesn't rarely come along and very rarely, if ever, actually attains
Right.
significant power.
And Obama is a weak president because he promised to close Guantanamo down, and he hasn't closed it down.
He also promised to follow the Constitution with regard to the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment, and he
Poor.
hasn't done that either.
Right. Now, what will Hillary do? That's the question mark.
I don't have. She's going to, as far as this stuff goes, as far as American imperialism and respecting the
I'm still
full faith of the Constitution, I don't have any significant hope.
I have more hope in Hillary than I do Trump.
Oh, absolutely, of course. That's not even a debate. There's no questioning that, like, on most issues, at least domestically, she's going to be a far superior
Okay, good.
president than Trump.
Right.
But I also don't
we'll-
expect her to have any sort of McGovern-esque
No, I think she'll be lucky to
ideological commitment
she'll
to
be lucky
constitutional
to
veracity.
finish out her one-term president.
Oh, yeah, she'll be extremely vulnerable in 2020 if the Republicans
And I
can
hope we have a
bring
better
themselves
candidate
to
in
elect
2012.
or nominate
But this
anybody.
this 2012 candidate should
Vaguely.
say he's going to enforce the Constitution as it was originally written.
The 2020 candidate?
Yeah, whoever the candidate
yeah.
is.
Well, yeah, I would love to see a true commitment to
Who's going to enforce the War Powers Clause?
the principles.
Congress has the duty to declare war.
Here's my prediction: if Hillary Clinton should get in, or should it be Donald Trump? I don't. They're both one-termers. Whoever gets in is a one-termer.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I don't, yeah.
Well, I hope that's true.
I don't see, they're just so unpopular. They're the two most unpopular nominees.
They
in the
both have
history of
more
the
negatives
country.
than ever before. Right.
Robert, we're approaching a three-quarter mark.
Well,
so-
then we're going to, if we just make one more final summary on the last presidential debate. Do you want to say anything more about imperialism or Hillary or Trump before we change the topic to
No, I think,
a prediction of what's going to happen tonight?
I think we can
Go to
move on
tonight?
to the vice presidential debate. Sure.
Okay, well, let's skip up there. I'd just like to sign off by quoting again for everybody the First Amendment. gift which I carry around. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, abridging the freedom of speech, press, the right of the people to peaceably assemble, and the petition the government for redress of grievances. Unfortunately, we have a growing police state which has to police the growing imperial politicians, particularly in the Republican Party. You disagree with any of that?
No, I don't.
Good. Okay, well, let's go to this part two, the vice presidential candidate. 4th of tonight. Do you want to say anything about it? You got any predictions? You want to say anything about the moderator?
I predict there will be significantly less viewers
That's true.
tonight than there were last week.
That's very true.
I predict that there will probably be significantly less fireworks, and it will probably be a little bit more policy heavy
That's
than
true.
personality
That is
heavy.
true. They're not going to be talking about either Trump or Hillary.
It's going to be held in Farmville, Virginia.
That's right. Going to
Now,
be.
Robert, you were saying that they probably are not going to be talking too much about Trump or
That's right.
Clinton.
That's right. It's not going to be a personality celebrity discussion.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it's
And-
going to be policy.
Well, what we mean by policy is that Pence is going to defend the Republican Party as a party, and Kaine is going to defend the Democratic Party as a party. They're going to talk about the two-party establishments, as you would say. I would say the two-party, they have a national Republican Party and a Democratic national. The party committees control the candidates, who gets money and so forth. That's what they should be, in my opinion, and that's what they are predicted to be discussing. Now, do you know anything about the moderator?
Oh, actually, no, not that much.
Well, her name is Elaine Quijano. She works for CBSN and CBS, and she is a native Filipino. So that's an interesting ethnic twist to this. So she can be.
She doesn't have a huge national profile.
No, she was actually born in Chicago, Illinois, but she had Filipino parents who came here. And so she's going to be so-called Asian American. So in that sense, she's going to be an outsider. Okay. So I think she's going to be, well, she's going to be in favor of because she is a woman. So she's going to tilt it in favor of McCain, because Pence has definite problems with women.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be strictly neutral.
What I think Pence's greatest challenge in this debate will be is defending the ever-changing attitudes of Trump toward any given policy issue at any time. So if Mike Pence goes out there and takes a stand on, I'd take any issue.
He's
really.
going to take his own stand.
Right, and he's going to pitch it as Trump's, but how is he going to be able to balance the fact that Trump changes his mind on every issue?
He's going to ignore Trump.
With seemingly every passing hour.
I think he's going to ignore Trump, and I think that McCain is going to. Well, Kaine might say a little bit more about Hillary because she's winning in the polls.
Yeah, Mike's not going to want to talk about Trump that much.
All right, here's an interesting article in the Athens.
But how's he going to take a stand on any issues when his
He's got definite stands.
candidate? He does, but his candidate
He's not going.
doesn't.
He's going to say next Sunday we'll hear what Trump and Hillary are going to say.
Robert and I were talking.
They're just
about
going to
this
defend
earlier
themselves.
in the day,
Yeah.
David, and he thought perhaps that you might not even hear Trump and Clinton's name even mentioned. It's going to, these guys are going to represent themselves, and
They're going to represent their party, right?
yes.
Well, then they're
And
gonna have-
It's not really, it's not really. They're not promoting both of,
That creates a whole nother set of landmines for Pence, though, because if he's representing himself, for instance, he voted for the Iraq War that Donald Trump has said
Well,
that he didn't support and lied about not supporting, but,
yeah, but you
it's
see,
definitely
you see
been
the
against.
reply of the
or
Republicans
campaigned
is
against.
that both Hillary and Pence voted for the Iraq War.
And, well, I'm talking about the disparity between Pence and Trump.
Well, that's not going to.
And being where
Because they don't
this
align on a lot of
debate
issues. Pence is a
located
hardcore-
at this evening, I think he's going to try. He's a very religious man. Pence is.
They're both religious.
Yes,
Right.
And I think they're
both going to talk
try
about
to
religion.
appeal to
That's
the,
right. Religion is going to be a big issue
Yes.
tonight. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah.
Here is an
that
article.
makes sense.
Here is an article by our critic Cal Thomas. It's called "Faith in the Vice Presidential Debate." Today's Messenger, 4th of October. And he starts out with a good paragraph, which I agree with. In every election cycle since Jimmy Carter instituted the born-again, quote, end of quote, into political lexicon, the politician's faith has been an object of curiosity and contention. You don't have any disagreement with that, do you?
No.
Okay. Well, then the question is, who invented the born-again cliche? Where does that come from?
Well, I would trace its roots, at least on a political level, back to the...
No, it's religious.
well,
Cal
I know-
Thomas is religious.
I know that born-again Christian is... We're talking about the vice presidential debate. The Reagan coalition is where evangelicals and born-again Christianity
No,
began to play
it
a
started
role
with
on
Jimmy
the right.
Carter. He says it started with Jimmy Carter. And you agreed with that.
Well,
I
yeah,
think that's true.
yeah. Jimmy Carter was
Jimmy
able to
Carter-
win a lot of the South
Jimmy
with his religious...
Carter said, I am
bona
a
fides.
born-again Christian when he first ran in 76.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he later regretted that. He retreated. He was a naive Baptist in 1976.
Mm-hmm.
But as he got into the campaign, he resigned from the Southern Baptist Church and said, I have my own independent liberal Baptist church in Plains, Georgia. And he was a pioneer in integration.
Well, as you just pointed out, though, you're talking about, that was Jimmy Carter's personal evolution. I think it was the Reagan coalition that actually politicized evangelicals
All right, well, I'll just read you.
into a
All right, you
group
think
of
what you
voters
want to
that
think,
voted
but
Republican.
Right, because he had a lot of support from some of those people. I can't think offhand some of the names.
Okay.
Some of the names of those religious
All right.
televangelists and everything at that
Oh,
time.
like Falwell
Okay.
and
Falwell,
whatnot.
Jerry
Yeah.
Falwell.
all right, well, I'll tell you where the born-again idea came. It came from Jesus Christ. Jesus was asked by a man by the name of Nicodemus.
I know the story.
It says, Jesus, how can I be saved? And Jesus said, well, you heard that you should be baptized, and I was baptized by John the Baptist, and I tell you, you must be born again. But this time you have to be born with the Holy Spirit. You have to repent from your sins. That's what born again means. A born again Christian means that he believes that you are saved by the grace of God and by Jesus Christ, who said that you have to be born again. That's where it came from. So the Protestant Church began to talk about being born again. Now, the Catholic Church defined Christianity is that the Pope is the vicar of Christ. You don't have to be born again. You just have to obey the authoritarian church of Jesus Christ. Now, Thomas is a Calvinist, and he knew where the born-again sermon came from. Okay? So anyway, this is what he says. Every election cycle since Jimmy Carter introduced born again into the political lecture, a politician's faith has been an object of curiosity and contention. Then he talks about Hillary Clinton. In all appearances in Iowa, Hillary Clinton responded to the question about her faith by saying she is a Christian and a Methodist, and that to her is the most important commandment, is to love the Lord with all of your might and to love your neighbor as yourself. Well, I agree with that too.
Yeah.
I'm a
We
Christian
have
too.
2 minutes remaining.
Okay, now you disagree with that.
Disagree with what?
What Thomas just said.
About Hillary Clinton's beliefs?
Yeah,
I believe he accurately quoted her.
okay.
Do I agree with her statement? Is that what you're asking?
Well, I'm just telling you.
I agree with the second part about loving your neighbor as yourself.
All right, well-
I'm not a Christian, so
All right, well, you're not a Christian.
loving the Lord with all
That-
my heart isn't
That
relevant to
is
me.
a very dangerous stand. There has been never an atheist who's been elected
I didn't
president.
call myself an atheist.
He was in
All right,
I
what do you
said
call
I'm not a
yourself?
Christian.
Listen, we're going to get a 1 minute.
All right, what are you trying to tell me?
Yeah, 1 minute.
Nothing.
Robert.
You asked if I agreed with the statement. I said I agree with the second part about loving my neighbor.
Well, I am saying that this debate between Kane and Pence, they're both going to claim to be Christians,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they both
and
are Christians.
the voter is going to have to choose between them.
They're going to come across as two preachers, is what they're going to come across
Yeah.
as.
I think that's accurate. Probably.
Okay, all right. So that's what Thomas says.
Yeah, they're not appealing to me.
We're going to have to wrap this up.
Okay,
So today
so
we've covered a lot of ground today.
are you going to bother to listen to the thing tonight?
Oh yeah, I'm going to watch the debate.
All right.
Yeah.
And are you going to draw any conclusion about who wins the debate?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it'll be interesting.
It'll be interesting. Okay, fine. The big debate is going to be Sunday when this will be the last presidential debate.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
You get 5 seconds.
Okay.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. The vice presidential debate is tonight, but as always, debate is the essence, is the oxygen of democracy, as the good professor always says. And thank you very much for having me. We'll look
Okay.
forward to tonight's vice presidential debate.
Okay.